China has responded to Trump's import taxes with a 34% retaliatory tariff on all U.S. goods entering China.
The imposition of steep tariffs on a wide array of imports marked one of the most significant departures in U.S. trade policy under President Donald Trump. And nowhere has the reverberation been felt more acutely than in the nation's farming and agricultural sectors. While tariffs were championed as a tool to rebalance trade deficits and secure better deals, particularly with China, long the leading purchaser of U.S. soybeans, the reality on the ground has been far more complex, generating both immediate pain and long-term uncertainty for farmers and ranchers across the country. From skyrocketing input costs to plummeting export volumes, the multifaceted impacts of these levies have reshaped planting decisions, indebtedness, and the federal government's role in propping up farm incomes. As a story of policy ambition colliding with global supply chains, the saga of Trump-era tariffs offers a cautionary tale about the intricate interdependence of modern agriculture and international commerce. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. One of the earliest and most dramatic effects of Trump's initial tariff offensive, launched in mid-2018, was the precipitous drop in U.S. soybean exports to China, which had long been America's largest single foreign market for the crop. Following retaliatory Chinese duties of up to 25% on U.S. agricultural products, soybean shipments plunged by 77%, translating to roughly $19 billion in lost export revenue over an 18-month period. This contraction rippled through farm balance sheets, as producers who had invested heavily to expand soy acreage suddenly faced an oversupplied domestic market and depressed prices. Although the USDA's Market Facilitation Program provided aid, eventually totaling $16 billion in 2018 and another $16 billion in 2019, the injections amounted to a stopgap rather than a structural fix, leaving many farmers more reliant on government support than buoyed by improved market access. Beyond the headline-grabbing export shortfalls, the tariff regime also drove up the cost of farm inputs, squeezing profit margins that were already under pressure from low commodity prices. U.S.-made tractors, combines, and other machinery often incorporate foreign-made components, everything from hydraulic hoses to microchips. So the imposition of duties on steel, aluminum, and electronics reverberated through manufacturing supply chains. Fertilizer prices, too, rose as global trade in phosphate and potash products became subject to punitive levies. For an industry characterized by thin margins, where the difference between profit and loss can hinge on a single bushel of corn, these increased expenses translated into tangible hardship. Industry groups cautioned that higher input costs would not only curb farmers' willingness to invest in new technology, but could also drive some smaller operations to the brink of insolvency. While the first round of tariffs targeted specific sectors, the administration's later decision to broaden duties to nearly all major trading partners intensified the strain on agriculture. In mid-2025, the administration announced higher levies on imports from the European Union, Canada, Mexico, and others, insisting that these measures would accelerate the negotiation of fairer trade agreements. For many farmers, however, the expanded trade war felt akin to changing a tire while driving down the road. As one fourth-generation Iowa grain grower lamented, with commodity prices in a multi-year downturn, farmers lacked the financial cushion that had helped them weather the earlier rounds of trade disruption. The unpredictable policy environment made planning next year's planting decisions fraught, and credit conditions tightened as lenders grew wary of escalating risks. The cumulative effect was a deepening malaise in rural credit markets and an erosion of farmer confidence in the administration's economic stewardship. The human toll of these policy swings is perhaps best exemplified by individual farmers' stories, which underscore how federal decisions translate into real-world consequences. In Colorado, for instance, a fifth-generation irrigated crop farmer invested more than $380,000 in equipment and labor through the Farm Labor Stabilization Pilot Program, awaiting a government grant to reimburse those costs. Delays stemming from an executive order that froze USDA grant disbursements left him unable to hire reliable migrant workers at peak season, forcing him to scale back planting and suffer reduced yields. Though the grant eventually arrived, the farmer's cash flow had been strained, credit lines were maxed out, and the resulting stress on both the operation and the farm family was profound. Stories like his reveal the fragility of modern farm businesses, which often operate with razor-thin working capital and depend heavily on predictable government programs. At the same time, the ripple effects extended to rural labor markets, where immigration policies and reduced grant funding combined to exacerbate worker shortages. Many specialty crop farms rely on H-2A visas for seasonal laborers, and the USDA's slower processing times and program freezes meant that harvest crews arrived late, or in insufficient numbers. The cost to farmers was twofold. They either paid higher wages to attract domestic workers, or faced unharvested crops and quality losses. In California's labor-intensive fruit and vegetable fields, the shortage of experienced pickers threatened to leave produce to rot in the fields, driving up local prices for consumers and eroding farm profits. These developments also underscored the broader political debate over immigration reform, illustrating how trade and labor policies intersect in the agriculture sector. Consumer households have felt the reverberations as well in the form of higher grocery bills. One advocacy group estimated that Trump's tariffs would raise food costs for an average family by several $100s annually, an increase 3 times larger than prevailing inflation rates for groceries. While food companies often attribute price hikes to supply chain disruptions or rising wages, the tariffs provided a convenient cover for passing on additional costs to consumers. Moreover, the multiplicative effect, whereby some firms use the tariffs as an excuse to raise prices on unrelated products, heightened concerns about price gouging in an era of tight household budgets. This dynamic fueled criticism that the administration's trade battles were in effect attacks on working and middle-class families, disproportionately affecting those already struggling with food insecurity. Despite the apparent hardships, survey data painted a puzzling picture of divided sentiment among farmers themselves. A nationwide poll of producers operating farms with annual revenues above $500,000 found that 70% believed the tariffs would ultimately strengthen U.S. agriculture by forcing trading partners to negotiate better deals, while 43% feared an immediate hit to their earnings. This support reflected a belief that a guaranteed purchase agreement, particularly with China, could stabilize commodity prices and reduce the risk of price crashes. However, the same respondents also reported elevated anxiety over escalating costs and the unpredictability of government aid programs. The ambivalence highlights a fundamental tension. Farmers remained hopeful for long-term gains, but resentful of short-term pain and bureaucratic hurdles. Regional disparities further complicated the picture. Corn and soybean producers in the Midwest, who bore the brunt of China's retaliatory tariffs, saw sharper declines in export volumes and faced more acute financial stress, even as northern dairy and livestock operations contended with higher feed costs driven by raised grain prices. In contrast, growers of specialty crops, fruits, nuts, and vegetables, fought over labor shortages and export barriers in markets like Mexico and Canada. Farms in border states like Texas, where cotton exports feed textile mills abroad, suffered when retaliatory tariffs hit U.S. cotton with duties of up to 20%, drying up demand and depressing prices. These localized impacts underscored the uneven nature of tariff disruptions, complicating efforts by policymakers to craft one-size-fits-all relief measures. In response to mounting pressure, the USDA rolled out a series of bailout and aid programs, totaling upwards of $12 billion in direct payments to producers of corn, cotton, soybeans, sorghum, wheat, dairy, and certain meat products. While these payments helped stabilize some balance sheets, critics argued that they merely entrenched dependence on federal subsidies without addressing the underlying issues of market access and cost competitiveness. Moreover, the distribution of aid, heavily skewed toward the largest commodity producers, drew criticism for favoring high-volume operations at the expense of small and mid-sized family farms. As some leaders from farm advocacy organizations warned, the continual patchwork of subsidies risked creating moral hazard, where producers might gamble on future bailouts rather than build resilience through diversification and efficiency improvements. Financial markets, too, reacted to the heightened trade tensions, with agricultural land values stagnating after years of steady gains and lenders tightening borrowing standards. The Peterson Institute for International Economics cautioned that the tariffs could drive investors away from American assets, if the measures were perceived as a signal of unpredictable economic policy. Lower land values erode farmers' collateral base, increasing the cost of capital and constraining the ability of younger or beginning farmers to buy into the industry. These financial headwinds threaten to accelerate the consolidation trend, as larger, better capitalized agribusinesses acquired distressed properties at depressed prices, reshaping the rural landscape and potentially reducing competition in local markets. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Trump's tariffs affecting U.S. farmers and agriculture? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.